Muito boa tarde para todos. Good afternoon, everyone. Our session will be in English, but I will say a few words in Portuguese first. Portanto, mais uma vez, muito boa tarde. Boa tarde para os nossos alunos que nos estão a acompanhar através do sistema interno da universidade. E muito boa tarde para aqueles que nos acompanham em várias partes do mundo, particularmente, obviamente, aqui na nossa diáspora, quer seja na Califórnia, em outro estado da União Americana, ou então em qualquer província do Canadá, ou também aqueles amigos que nos acompanham sempre no Brasil, alguns nos Açores, outros em outras partes de Portugal, Madeira ou Portugal continental, desde que tenham energia elétrica depois de haver um grande apagão, mas obviamente também aqueles que nos acompanham nos países lusófonos. E agora sim, vamos passar para inglês. Good afternoon to the students who are attending. This is the Portuguese 1A class. Thanks to all of them who are attending. A few more, I'm sure, will be dropping in because there is an assignment, reminding the students that there is an assignment that goes along with this. So please answer the questions that I put forth based on Professor José Luís da Silva's presentation. So welcome to all of the students, first of all, first and foremost to them, and to all of those who are following us on the various social media platforms. We thank all the groups, usually anywhere between 40 and 50 groups that always agree to carry these presentations live because it's a way for us to reach many others as well. So this is another session of the symposium, Filaments of the Atlantic Heritage. The theme this year is the Azorian Legacy in the Americas. And the Symposium Filaments of the Atlantic Heritage was a live event between 1990 and 2002. Professor José Luís da Silva attended just about every one of them, I think almost every one of them, here in Tulare, California. Drove down 3 hours to attend this event. Where we brought together writers, academics, teachers, cultural activists from different parts of California, and a group of Azorian writers and painters and musicians. Then we took a break. It was a 10-year project that lasted 12 years. And then 4 years later, we began again with an online version, and Professor José Luís da Silva has been part of that as well. And so this is our 16th, if we count those 12, this is our 16th Symposium, Filaments of the Atlantic Heritage. Just a brief intro as the students join us. So we gather with this symposium at the confluence of memory and vision, where the winds of the Atlantic carry the voices of the islands. The voices of the islands, which to us are resilient, are creative, and hopefully eternal. Filaments of the Atlantic Heritage is more than a symposium. It is a living mosaic of heritage, a tribute to the enduring spirit of the Azorian people and their diasporic voyages across the Americas. From California to Brazil, from classrooms and library settings to live streams, we braid together the threads of culture, intellect, and creativity. Our vision through the symposium is to cultivate a space where the Azorian soul can speak in many tongues through poetry, prose, scholarship, journalism, performance, and conversation. Doing so, we hope to ignite a transatlantic dialogue that affirms identity, that honors ancestry, and inspires the future. So the purpose of our symposium is threefold. Number one, to celebrate the Azorian legacy in its many forms. Number two, to engage generations across the diaspora in a meaningful dialogue and artistic expression. And number three, to build enduring structures for knowledge, visibility, and empowerment. Having given you that bit, let us now turn to the meat and bones, which is a presentation by Professor José Luís da Silva. A little bit for those of you who don't know, I think in many of, especially here in California, he is a very well-known person. So Professor José Luís da Silva taught for many years, for 3 decades at the San Jose High School. He was a colleague of mine at the same time that I was teaching at Tulare Union High School. We did many wonderful projects together for our students. It wasn't for us, but it was for our students. He is now retired and has been retired for a few years. He has done extensive travel throughout Brazil, and that's why we invited him. He's made many connections which are fascinating between the Brazil, not just southern Brazil, but especially in southern Brazil, but also other parts of Brazil as well, with the Azorian communities. The Azores have had, as many of you that followed our first opening session with the director Jose Andrade, he talked about the Azorian connections in different parts of the world, but extensively about it in Brazil. And so you'll be able to see that. Professor José Luís da Silva is also a poet, a published poet with a wonderful book, and which we hope that he continues to write poetry off and on. I know he has probably things written. He's very, very meticulous about his poetry. He only publishes something when he feels that it's perfected. I compare him a lot with my friend, passed away. Unfortunately, both are friends. He was a friend to both of us, Marcolino Candeias, who I was always constantly after write poetry, and I knew he had things written, but he would only publish when it was right time to do so. And so welcome, José Luís. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with our students and with those following us throughout the different parts of the diaspora. He'll be talking about the connections between Brazil and the Azores, especially. Has lots of different things in architecture and in many different ways that the Azorians, for being such a small region with less than 250,000 people nowadays, really had an influence in different parts of the world. So welcome.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you, at least, for the invitation, and thank you, students, for putting up with me. I promise not to be too boring. At least I'm going to try not to be too boring and to talk too much. I want you to look at the images I'm going to show you about the connections between the Azores and Brazil, and kind of form a triangle in our minds. I'm sure you know about the Azorian traditions here in California. So think about this connection, Azores, Brazil, and what we live in here, what we know here in California. So I'm going to, this is not an academic work. This is just a presentation of experiences and things that I've witnessed and I've researched a little bit. And I hope that you enjoy. And if you don't, let me know, and I'll just cut it short.
Okay. Hopefully, everybody can see. José Luís, you can see the presentation now, right? Correct?
Yes, I can. Okay. Go. Yeah, Denise is going to be in the controls of this, so he's going to move the slides. Yep. Next. Okay, good. Well, you all know the geographical regions. Brazil, an enormous country in South America, and the Azores, 9 small islands in the Atlantic. You all know that, okay? But there is a connection, a historical, cultural, human connection between the islands and Brazil. And keep one thing in mind. Portugal was an empire, went all over the world, you know that. But if you think about the Azores and Madeirans were the first Portuguese to leave the country and go settle somewhere. They settled on these islands that didn't have anybody on them. And then from then, very quickly, the population exploded and they started going to other parts of the Portuguese so-called empire. And so one of the reasons that they went was Brazil, and they have a profound influence. Together with Portuguese from other places, Madeira, mainland Portugal, have a profound influence in the building and development of Brazil. Next. We start here with Rio de Janeiro. Everybody knows about Rio and the Carnival and all the beautiful things. Rio de Janeiro is a very Portuguese city. One of the reasons for that is that in the beginning of the 19th century, when Napoleon invaded Portugal, the Portuguese king, John VI, and his court all went to Brazil. And Brazil actually became the capital of Portugal for a few years. And they brought with that people and libraries and a lot of cultural wealth and even linguistic aspects, because in Rio de Janeiro is one of the areas in Brazil, there are more, not just this one, where the final S or the S at the end of a syllable is pronounced like we do in Portugal, like Lisboa, etc. Okay, so there's many different speech patterns in Brazil, and Rio is influenced particularly by the Portuguese in general. I'm not going to say the Azorians, but the Portuguese in general. Next. The government of the Azores for several decades now has instituted the Casas dos Açores. We have one here in California, but there are several in Brazil. Rio de Janeiro has one of them, São Paulo, Salvador da Bahia, Santa Catarina, in the south of Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul. There's another one I didn't add in here in Espírito Santo, and I just saw an article by Director José Andrade. They're planning on starting one in Belo Horizonte, capital of Minas Gerais. What are Casas do Brasil? These are institutions that are supported in part by the Azorean government, together with the Azorean communities in the specific cities and states, and they develop cultural events and exchange of people. Often from one Casa dos Açores in Brazil, they'll travel to the other one. So it's a very rich Azorean tradition. Next. The Casa dos Açores Rio de Janeiro was founded by the famous Azorean writer from Terceira, from the island of Terceira, from the same city as my friend Denise Borges. He was from Praia da Vitória, and he lived in Brazil for a few years. He taught there. He also wrote some very interesting books about Brazil. I've read one about the Amazon and the Belém area, one about Ouro Preto, Minas Gerais. So he was a man that lived a few years in Brazil and pushed for the creation of Casas Açores in Rio de Janeiro. So there's a definite connection here. Next. This is the interior of the Casas Açores, and you see right away the icons, the Holy Spirit, the crown, the flag, the dove, and there's a certain camaraderie. This is that picture in the bottom. I visited Brazil many years ago with a friend of mine, and over there there's the president of the Casas Açores, and our taxi driver was originally from Terceira, and he's a taxi driver in Rio de Janeiro. Next. Literary connections, very quickly. Probably the most famous writer in Brazil is Machado de Assis. He wrote many, many wonderful books, mostly novels and short stories, but also some poetry. And his connection to the Azores is very simple. His mother was Azorean. Often he's presented as an Afro-Brazilian writer, and he is for his father's side. But on his mother's side, he's Portuguese, he's Azorean, and she was born and raised in São Miguel, and then she went to Brazil. She married this Afro descendant, Machado de Assis' father, and she died at the age of when he was 10 years old. But they're very, very important. If you ever want to read anything about Machado de Assis, I recommend the novel Dom Casmurro, D-O-M, and then Casmurro, C-A-S-M-U-R-R-O, and it's almost a treatise on jealousy. It's a very interesting book, probably one of his most famous. He was, even though his mother died very young, he was really devoted to his mother, wrote a poem called Minha Mãe, and he even had a quote that said, mother's love is the highest form of altruism. So his mother taught him how to read. So he's very much connected to his Azorean mother's roots. Next. And then, of course, this is the poem, part of the poem that he wrote about his mother. So again, the most famous Brazilian novelist, and one of the best in the world, really. I mean, recently he's been rediscovered here in the United States, and people are at awe by the quality of the writing of Machado de Assis. If you think about a writer in Brazil, Machado de Assis is one. Cecília Meirelles, one of the best poets, woman poets in Brazil, also was born and raised in Rio de Janeiro, and her mother was also from the Azores, coincidentally from the island of São Miguel. And she even visited the Azores and wrote a book called the Folkloric Panorama of the Azores, especially of the island of São Miguel. And she wrote poetry that had a lot to do with the ocean and even the islands. This poem in here, we live in this archipelago. Some pictures of her visit to the island of São Miguel, where her mother was from. And now we're going to jump a little bit. Okay, we're going to go to Maranhão. Maranhão, as you can see by the redness in that map. The next slide, please. Okay, that's in the northeast of Brazil. You can see very close to the Amazon region, and that area was initially settled by the French. The next, please. The French, and it's called Saint Louis de Marignan. Saint Louis was a French king in the 13th century, I believe. He was actually a first cousin of the King of Portugal. The French arrived in Saint Louis de Marignan, and here's a statue of the French commander Daniel de la Touche. And they arrived and they built. If you can move next one, next. Okay. He arrived with his expedition, and he built a small wooden fort, and it did not last long. The next one, you will see that the city of São Luís de Maranhão has a lot of Portuguese things. Now, Azorian per se, not so much nowadays, but you see a lot of Azorian Portuguese things like the Literary Recreation Association, Portuguese Association, and the architecture is very much influenced by the Portuguese. You can see by the cobblestones, by the verandas. You can see by the tiles on the houses. And if you look at the top right, you will see actually the coat of arms of São Luís de Maranhão, which is the French fleur-de-lis and the Portuguese quinas in there. So very much that. But the one thing that in Brazil, if you talk about São Luís de Maranhão, everybody says, "Oh, French." The French influence in São Luís de Maranhão was very small. You'll see in here, next slide. You see in here in three languages, you can Portuguese, English, and French, what happened. They arrived in 1612, they built a small fort, and 2 years later, the Portuguese arrived, they built another fort that was attacked by the French, but in 1615, that was 3 years later, the French surrendered and the Portuguese took the area of São Luís de Maranhão. So when in Brazil, everybody thinks about São Luís de Maranhão, French. It's really non-existent except for the name, the influence of the French. And in 1619, next slide, please. 1619, something very interesting happened. Right away, about 1,000 settlers from the Azores Island arrived to settle the new city. This is the capital of a state, so a very quick Portuguese Azorian settlement of these islands in the 17th century. And next, there's a museum in São Luís de Maranhão called Casa de Maranhão, and in there are many things that have to do with this settlement. Here's next. Here's a porcelain plate depicting the arrival of the Portuguese to São Luís de Maranhão. Initially to an island and then into São Luís. Next. Not to confuse with a lot of facts, but if you had the time to read this, it will tell you who arrived, when they arrived in the 17th century, and this settlement was particularly from the islands of Santa Maria and São Miguel. Now, I'm not going to talk about that, but I could have. There are other settlements, there are other ways, other situations where the Azorians were involved in expanding the territory of Brazil. This was one of them. There's another one in, first of all, Rio de Janeiro. When the Portuguese arrived in Rio de Janeiro, the French came in, and then the Portuguese, quote unquote, kicked out the French. And so the French were defeated in São Luís de Maranhão, in Rio de Janeiro. And another important thing, too, in the north of Brazil, I don't have any slides of that, even though I have the information, in the state of Amapá, which is in the mouth of the Amazon River. When the King John VI came to Brazil, fleeing Napoleon, the French had the French Guianas there, and the king, just to get even with the French, sent some troops over there to take some of that territory. And in there, that had actually been a city, Macapá, which had before that been founded by Azorians, specifically from the islands of Terceira and Graciosa. Okay, there's a lot to be said about these different influences. But let's now take a look at a particular influence of Azorians in São Luís do Maranhão. The Holy Spirit. All of you know about that because in California we thrive. It's probably the glue, the cultural glue that connects us more than anything else. And it occurs in all the islands of the Azores. It's very strong in the island of Terceira. I picked a picture of an Império in Terceira, and you can see on the picture to the right. On the painting, you have the typical things: the crown, the dove, the wine, etc. So next one. It occurs in all the islands in San Miguel, the city of San Miguel, city of Ponta Delgada. There is now, last few decades, there's been an enormous celebration, not a traditional one, but the whole town, they set up these tables. Everybody has sopas and wine, just like we do here in California. And of course, they have entertainment, the foliões. Foliões are a tradition from the medieval times. Don't forget, the Azores were settled from the 15th century on. We were still in medieval times. And they brought these traditions, which from island to island, they were different because the settlement was different. For example, in San Miguel, in Santa Maria, we have mostly people from southern Portugal, where in Terceira, you have people from northern Portugal with some Alentejo influence. Next. In Maranhão, I'm sure you can identify a lot of the things in here related to the Holy Spirit. Casa de Maranhão, that museum, you see the crown, you see the dove, you see the color. The color is mostly red and white, the color of the Holy Spirit. You also see the capes. Now, they have a queen and an emperor. Okay, so you have a male and a female. And we have that in California in one instance, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, next. You see these capes, next one. These capes are different from the ones in California, but they also have similarities on the beauty, on the richness that they display. So you can definitely the symbolism. Next. So when you think about São Luís de Maranhão, remember the Azorian influence right from the beginning. There are some more symbols. We go fast on those. Next. One interesting thing that happened in São Luís de Maranhão, as the Azorians mixed with the population coming in. Remember that a lot of people came from Africa as slaves. The Africans actually adopted this celebration of the Holy Spirit very, very much. They integrated that very much. Now, I have a theory, I may be wrong, okay, but I look at this the following way. If you're an African, you are African American, you're black, you know what? And most of the symbols in Portuguese religion were of white. The father, the depiction is an old white man. The son is a younger man. But they're both white. The Holy Spirit has no color. It's a spirit, and you can easily associate the idea of a Holy Spirit or with the African spirits. So the African slaves in São Luís de Maranhão adopted this tradition, and now they are integral part of it, and they know where it came from, but it's their culture now. Next. And here is a description. I'm not going to read all this, but you can see the queens, the pomp of these celebrations that will be similar to the Azores, similar to California. Here, the next one, yes, this one. Here's a poem. We like to have poetry. We're very poetic in Portugal. To the Holy Spirit, and there's a picture of an African American child right next to the dove. The symbolism and this fraternal love that extends to all races that the Holy Spirit, the celebration, is supposed to bring. And let's not forget, here in California, the sopas are for everybody. You don't have to be Portuguese. You don't have to be Catholic. You just have to come in and sit down and eat. So that's that spirit. Next. In Terceira, there's a folk song. It's called Samacai. I'm sure your teacher, Professor Denise Borges, could sing it for you better than I can. But it has to do with a ship that's shipwrecked in the shows of Maranhão. And it goes like this: Samacai, and I can't sing. So, Samacai, deu a costa, ai deu a costa nos baixos do Maranhão. Toda a gente se salvou. I se salvou, só o São Macaio now. So the island of Terceira has a connection to this Maranhão, and we move on. Next. Taking a ship during a very stormy day, I went across the river and through the ocean to Alcântara, a colonial city in the state of Maranhão, very close to São Luís. And I found some interesting things related to the Azores, because this was also founded by settlers from the Azores, particularly São Miguel and Santa Maria. Next one. But there are influences in here. On the top right is Vende-se doce de espécie. I'm not an expert, but I believe that espécie is a sweet that's very popular in the island of São Jorge, for example. Okay, next. Here's the center of town, the way it was when the first settlers arrived. The church is in ruins, but it's still there. Next, with the pelourinho, the symbol of Portuguese power. Next, painting showing the kids, a very mixed ethnic population, some white, some African descendants. And I found this preschool in Alcântara called the Jardim de Infância Inácio de Viveiros Raposo. Why did I take a picture? Because Viveiros and Raposo are very common names in the island of São Miguel. And in this book that you see on the top left, Festa do Maranhão, it specifies that this city was founded by Azorians from São Miguel and Santa Maria. And there's a museum, Casa da Divina Exposição. Next. And in there, there's Holy Spirit things. There's a throne. Things different a little bit, but they also have a lot of similarities with us. The next, there's a description here that was highlighted, this telling the origins of the Holy Spirit celebrations. I'm not going to read that for you because you probably know Queen Elizabeth or Isabel and how that went. And on the right, a poster showing the little queen and the little emperor. Next. And it goes on and explains it here. If we had more time, I'd read it for you, but we're going to move. This celebration takes from 12 to 15 days in Maranhão. So it's an integral part of their society. Next. This is a painting in that museum. And if I were to step back a little bit, I could almost believe I was in the Azores. The imagery here, for example, the cafe in there that's decorated to a certain extent, the wine, the food, the people celebrating the colors, could be very Azorian. So this tradition integrated into the Afro-Brazilian tradition is as definitely the Azorian roots. Next, just some pictures of more things like that. I don't have to be talking about everything. Now on the left, there's a next one. Next, okay. On the left, there is some very African influence in here, which are the caixeiras. Caixeira is like a drum. So the African beat was integrated, and so they were these African descendants, women. They look at their ages: 75, 86, 72. They are the traditional drum beaters during the procession. So it's integrating an African rhythm to an Azorian celebration, Azorian Portuguese. You could be almost in California if you look at what's going on in these pictures. The desfile, the procession, and on the back where you can see somebody, a little marching band or some musicians playing. Okay, next. This was a guy that happened to be there. He was advertising for Imperador, the name of the emperor. I guess during the year they try to raise funds, and they sell T-shirts, and they try to raise funds for the celebration. This other poster on the left shows the drummers and the traditions. Now, I'm going to jump completely out of this to another Azorian tradition, which does not exist in California. It only exists in a small place in mainland Portugal and in the island of São Miguel, and in Brazil, in many parts of Brazil. Specifically, I visited this one in Pirenópolis in the state of Goiás, right next to the capital of Brazil, to Brasilia. So I'm going to give you a little history of that next, so that you understand what the celebration has to do. In 711, 8th century, the Muslims attacked the Iberian Peninsula, what later on became Spain and Portugal, and even had an incursion into France. And that created a gradual response by the Christians against the Muslims to push them back. And this is where the tradition of the cavalhadas, which has to do with cavalo, and you'll see why it has to do with this idea of fighting to reconquer the lands that once were Christian. Next, you see the map in here, which shows in green what the Muslims were able to, the regions they were able to attack, what is now Portugal, a great deal of Spain, except for the north, and then into France. And this is a time where even, we have, in the literature, Charlemagne, etc., these things occur. Next, going very quickly to the island of São Miguel, which is the only big place in Portugal where it's still celebrated. It's a tradition brought in the 16th century to the Azores. I have not seen this in other islands in the Azores. It doesn't exist nowadays except on the island of San Miguel. And in the city of Ribeira Grande, it is celebrated every year in the month of June. Next. Okay. And next. City Hall has a big party for the guests in there during that celebration. Next. And here you have in the tile of the City Hall, you have the cavalhadas. Cavalhadas are then the Christians that are dressed. There's the king, there's this nobleman, and they go through the streets, and they have this whole celebration of this medieval this tradition. There's a picture in there on the top, on the bottom right. That's my grandfather. He was the king of cavalhadas in the 40s and 50s. Next. So here's a celebration. The knights are supposed to come in their horses into the center of town, the city hall. There's trumpets announcing the arrival of the king. Fortunately, lately they've included women. It used to be men only event. Next, please. Yeah. Okay, one more. Yeah. They included now women, which is great. And so you have these women and horses accompanying the king. Here comes the king with his sword and the two noblemen. Next one. The two noblemen next to him. Next. And, very quickly, so you can see the imagery. Next. And then when he gets to the city hall, the king is supposed to proclaim some stanzas which he has prepared, and so it's a whole city celebration. So this exists originally in Portugal, mainland Portugal, still a little place there, but in San Miguel. And now we go into the next slide, which is into Brazil. In the town of Pirenópolis, you can see the state of Goiás. That's where the Pirenópolis is, right next to the federal district of the Distrito Federal. Brasilia, the capital. Okay, next. Okay. And it's a celebration that encompasses many things. You will see cavalhadas, this tradition of the horses. You'll see the Holy Spirit, and you'll see even a certain carnival attitude. Next. All in the same period. This takes about 4 weeks. It's a long, drawn thing. The whole city celebrates, and it's right next to Brasilia, as I said. So you have people coming from Brasilia. You have, but when I was there in this festivity, there was the ambassador of Portugal, the ambassador of Peru. They were there because they want to see these great celebrations. So this was this particular one in 2016, and people, of course, eat and drink, and here they're celebrating the virtues of the Holy Spirit, ciência, piedade, etc. Next is a museum, Museu do Divino, a museum of the Holy Spirit. In Brazil, they will say divino. We say divino, Espírito Santo. They just shorten it to divino. And in the church, they have the celebration. You will be more or less like here. Next. And this could be anywhere. Look at the crown, look at the scepter, look at the emperor, as they call it there, the Imperador, and his wife. These are the people that are organized. Just like Webinia, we have the people that organize the Holy Spirit celebrations, and it is in the Azores. Next. And of course, at night, there's a arraial, fireworks, etc. People enjoy themselves, but the crown, as you can see at the bottom right, is still present. Next. And of course, it's a time for celebration, a time for eating, etc. You see on the top right, this is a mascarada. This is the carnival. That's what, even though this happens after carnival, there's a certain amount of that Brazilian element in the celebrations. Next. And these are the mascaradas that go in the streets in their horses, and they are not representing the Holy Spirit. They're not representing cavalhadas. It's just another element. Next, you can see that. Okay. They like to ask for money so that they can buy alcohol, beer to drink. That's part of the festivity. Next. Okay. The main celebration takes place in a soccer stadium, and on the one side you have a blue tower which represents the Christians. On the other side, as I will show, there are the red tower representing the Muslims. Next. There is the red tower with the Muslim representing the Muslims, and then the masked men, first of all, appear. Okay, they have their fun. Next. And then comes the real thing. You have the knights in red representing the Muslims, and next you have in blue, you have the Christians. And pretend they're fighting. They have this fake. They don't hit it. They don't hit each other, but they pretend that they are. And next, and here's part of that so-called fight, representing that medieval tradition. And at the end, the Christians win, and the Muslims convert themselves to Christianity. Okay, that's how it works every year. Next, there's a small Museu das Cavalhadas in Pirenópolis, Goiás, that has the Cavalhadas element, but definitely the Holy Spirit. Next. Here you see a lot of the different things having to do with the Holy Spirit and also with the clownish part of that celebration. Interestingly, in that museum, they have a small section dedicated to the Cavalhadas in San Miguel de Azores. And they have pictures, they have little mementos from there that the Azorean government helped supply this to them and maintain the connection. This is a hat from that celebration in the Azores. Next. Okay. And they even have this very simple tablecloth. Most of us have something like that with the Azores. So they wanted to mark the relationship, the connection between the two parts of the world. Okay, we're going to move fast to the next slide and to another part of Brazil. So if you look at the map, you might be able to see, if you have good eyes, where we were. We're in Rio de Janeiro, towards the center, lower center, São Luís do Maranhão, and then we have Goiânia in the middle. They call it the heart of Brazil. Now we're going to go to the south of Brazil, the most well-known Azorean influence in Brazil, and Santa Catarina and Rio Grande do Sul. To explain the situation, in the 18th century, there was a territorial dispute between. If you could go back one slide, please. Go back one. Okay. No, back. Okay. If you take a look at the two states, Santa Catarina, capital is Florianópolis, and Rio Grande do Sul, capital is Porto Alegre. There was a dispute between Portugal and Spain, and that land went back and forth, and that included that and Uruguay. Uruguay at times was Portuguese, at times was Spanish. Ultimately, it was resolved to separate Uruguay from Argentina and create a bumper state. But what the legal minds of the time, the agreement between Portugal and Spain had is whoever occupied the land was theirs. So the King of Portugal, very astute, John V, he decided we're going to send a bunch of people to that area so that we can claim that for our Portuguese empire. And what did he do? He went particularly to the Azores. He also tried Madeira. There was one ship that came from Madeira, but it shipwrecked around Belém do Pará, somewhere in there. So the Madeiran influence, unfortunately, did not arrive here. So you have influence from the Azores, a heavy influence in the states of Santa Catarina and Rio Grande do Sul. And what they did, they got there. The king offered families. They didn't want single people. They want families to come and settle. Husband, wives, kids, grandparents. They came in, and the king gave them land, gave them a couple of ox and some tools to work in the land, some food. He actually promised more than he delivered. So when the people got there, they had a rough start, but they had to adapt to the local agriculture. For example, they were used to cultivate grains like wheat, and they were not able to. It didn't grow there, so they had to go into other crops like manioc, and so they adapted their food into that. But the one thing that remained was fish. Fish, very Azorean, very much in the Azorean diet, and in the southern part of Brazil also. Next. Okay, go quickly into this. As you approach Florianópolis, which is the capital of the state, Florianópolis per se is an island, okay, in the state of Santa Catarina, but it's also the city. And look at this enormous building. It's the ethnographic museum Casa dos Açores, Casa de Açores. And right there, as you're approaching the city, you can see there is a definite Azorean presence here. Next. The settlement of Santa Catarina, Rio Grande do Sul in the 18th century was done mostly by Azoreans from the Central Group. Center Group, Terceira, São Jorge, Pico, Faial, Graciosa. It does not mean there were no people from the islands, São Miguel, Santa Maria, Flores e Corvo, but those were less of an influence. So this is a very Central Azorian influence. Next. And in there, in the museum, you have artifacts and things that were that they gathered there have to do with the Azores. You recognize some of them. Next. In the center of the city of Florianopolis, the capital of the state, you have a market. And in this market, that particular time, they were having a Feira do Livro, book fair. And they had a specific presence of Azorian. By the cousins of Santa Catarina, they had books that had to do with the Azores, because the people in this area, now you have to have a different mindset. You arrive in here, and Azores is big, okay? People come to you and says, I'm an Azorian. An Azorian from the 18th century, but they still consider themselves Azorians. And I will show you some examples of that. Take a look next. Take a look at some of the words. Quintal Açoriano, the name of a famous restaurant. A clothing shop in English called Azorian. The hotel where I stayed, Hotel Fayal. Expresso São Miguel, a trucking company. So you have all these references to the Azores. Next. Casas Açores, as actually, unfortunately, this has closed since then, but they had a store in the market. And on the left, you can see, bottom left, you can see the center for Casas Açores, where they actually teach Azorian music. On the top right, you see people in there, descendants from the 18th century, dressed in Azorian outfits there. This is, of course, for folklore displays. They don't wear it every day. Next. You can see that many of the ceramics that relate to Azorian things and to Portuguese things. Next. The food. Now, the food has evolved. As I told you, when they arrived, the Azorians arrived there, they tried to maintain what they were used to eating, but they did not have what they had, so what they were used to. So they changed it into maniocs and all of the different aspects, and they incorporated that with their fish. But this restaurant, Açoriano, there are two of them. It's right by the ocean. It's a very famous and very well located one. Next, there are artists, descendants from those Azorians, like this couple, wonderful couple, Osmarina and Paulo Villalva, visit their atelier. And if you look at what they have, everything, or just about everything, has to do with the Azores and the Holy Spirit. Bottom right, you have the Dulce Cadars. They made that special, that crown in ceramics. They offer it to me. I have it here. I cherish that. These are wonderful people that you go over there, and you're Azorian, and they are thrilled to share that common ancestry. And if you are from California, it's even more interesting, because I'm an Azorian from California. They say, wow, Azorian from California. In the beginning of this century, there was in San Jose, California here, a gathering of the Holy Spirit's celebrations in the world. And we had several representations from Brazil, some of the very important ones. So they came all the way to California to learn from all of us, from here, from the Azores, from mainland Portugal. There's still a little bit of that. So there's this connection, there's this triangle. And this is something I like to foster, that without discriminating or putting anybody aside, we Azorians have certain characteristics, and we find this same characteristics of a certain humility, of a certain of a sense of giving, of receiving. Look at our fast as the Spirit Santo, feed everybody. There's a common sense, a common spirit, that if it's in California, in the Azores, in Brazil, it's a common experience. Next. Okay, like several ceramic things you can see, you get eyes. I just want to point out on the top left an embroiderer. This is called Rende de Bielroes. I don't know how to do it, but it's got the little wooden things tied to strings, and the women move it quickly, and they make this embroidery, or whatever you call that. And this is a tradition that used to exist in the Azores. But with time, it disappeared. So in the Azores, they were not doing this anymore. And the director of the Azorean communities then now is our friend José Andrade, and used to be our friend Paul Tibbs. He actually brought some women from Santa Catarina to the Azores to teach Azoreans how to do this, because the Azores had forgotten to do that. And now there's a cooperative in the Azores that does this Rede de Pelos, just like they do in Santa Catarina. Next. The Universidade Federal de Santa Catarina, the Federal University of Santa Catarina, they have a center, Núcleo de Estudos Açorianos, a center for Azorean studies. You have, in Fresno State, you have a center there. Here you have a center with a lot of books and publications, etc. At this time in 2008, this is an old poster. They were celebrating the 260 years of Azorean presence. And then you get out, you go towards the ocean, there's restaurants. If you look at the top right, there's a Balneário Açores. Balneário is a beach. And this restaurant, famous, Herança bar, it's started and developed by Azoreans, descendants of the Azoreans. And inside, it's an interesting restaurant. You'll see hanging from top Portuguese things like a flag from Nazaré, from mainland Portugal, a flag of Portugal, a flag from the city of Ponta Delgada. But more interesting enough, you have all these papers hanging. So you go there, you eat, and if you want, you write a note and you place it there, and people coming in, there's this exchange of messages from people from all over the world. Next. Being a beach, they have a lot of fish, and this is an article in the newspaper that's called Sabor Açoriano in Floripa. Floripa is a nickname for Florianopolis. So it's Azorean taste, Azorean flavors in Floripa. So 3 centuries later, they're still having the same traditions. A very interesting town, actually, in Florida, in Santa Catarina, excuse me, is Santo Antônio de Lisboa. Santo Antônio de Lisboa is really an Azorean town transplanted to Brazil in the 18th century. Look at the church. The slide to the right of this says Cemitério Irmandado Divino Espírito Santo. The cemetery is dedicated to the brotherhood, sisterhood of the Holy Spirit. So Santo Antônio de Lisboa. Obviously, Santo Antônio was a Portuguese saint. You went to Italy. Some people say Santo Antônio de Padua, but he's actually born and raised and studied in Portugal and went to Italy. He's a very iconic Portuguese saint. Next. In Santo Antônio de Lisboa, you'll see different references to the Azores. Taberna Açoriana, taberna, tavern. It's a kind of restaurant. Next. Bar Restaurante Açores, from a building from the 18th century, Casarão do século XVIII. So another restaurant in there with reference to the Azores. It's a very Azorean town, and everybody here, it seems like they are Azorean ancestry. I'll tell you an example. I was there with a friend of mine, and who was a professor there, and he introduced me to this young man who was fishing out there, and he told me, "Oh, I'm so and so. I'm from São Roque, São Miguel." His ancestors immigrated in the 18th century, and he still considered himself that he was from São Roque, São Miguel. I mean, that's an amazing thing. I challenge you to go in California 100 years from now and ask people where their family is from in the Azores. They might not remember. Next. There is a place called Caminho dos Açores. It's a road in that part of the island. It's called the Azorean Road. And here you have Açores Bar Restaurant. Look at the houses. This could be in the Azores. Look at the window, the guillotine style window. It could be in the Azores, could be in some other parts of Portugal. But the buildings remind you very much of where they came from. Next, other references. Mercado e Padaria Açoriano, a little market and the bakery with the name Açoriano in it. Next, Ribeirão da Ilha is another town that's extremely Azorean. Here's the church and some of the buildings. On the left, top left, you have will be more or less like an Império Terceiro, the Holy Spirit Império. So these references are there. Next, and that another Rancho Açoriano restaurant. They have 2 in the island. This is the other one. and look at the house on the top right. It's very Azorian. Next, the food. Okay, again, there's fish, but there's farofa, which is from manioc. There's I'm not an expert in, in this kind of cooking, so I'm not going to venture into the names of it, but it's very much fish adapted to the different products in the land that they were able to use. And keep in mind that really when the Azores got there and they had to adapt, it was the indigenous people, the Brazilian, Indian, whatever you want to call, that taught them how to do them and cultivate manioc, how to extract it properly, how to treat it. And actually, the Azores developed such a fine manioc flour, finer than anywhere in Brazil, that became known, it still exists as the most expensive, probably the most the one that people will look for more. Most. There's a small museum. I don't just outside with they have little classes in there. Of course, a lot of references to Portugal, the Azores, and on the right, because people visit here, I discovered this plate from California from a group here from San Jose that visited. They went there, they danced, they played their music. They went to they went to Rio de Janeiro, they went to São Paulo, they went to Santa Catarina. So it's a group folkloric Tempos do Outrora here from San Jose. So the connection with California, the Azores is strong. Next, you can see different things that you'll immediately recognize as having to do with the Azores, from the clothing to little statues to the symbols to all of that. Next, San Jose, not San Jose, California, but San Jose. This is now not in the island of Santa Catarina in Florida, but it's on the continental part. This is in the center of the city of San Jose, and this is a monument depicting the arrival and the efforts of the Azorians in this city, right in the center of town. Next. And there's a reference here, and my friend Professor Denise Borges will appreciate this. It talks about the branches coming from the Azores, from the island of Terceira, from Praia de Vitória. So, Denise, your relatives are there waiting for you to go greet them. These are the connections that you find. I mean, that when you get there, you feel so well received. You feel important. If you're an Azorian going there, you feel like you are almost at home. Okay, obviously the flag of the Azores. Okay, here you have the same document on the top. There's the bird. I believe that could be representing the dove of the Holy Spirit, but I think it's not that. I think that's the Azores, the hawk in the Azores. That's what that represents. And on the top left, you see references to agriculture. The guy with the products from the land, and then there's the fisherman. And then on the top right, you see the woman with the Renda de Bilros. So these activities are associated with what the Azorians did with the Caribbean. Next, there's the museum, the symbols, the museum in the city of San Jose. San Jose is here in California. And you see on top right, the Renda de Bilros, that embroidery, and of course the Holy Spirit symbols on the bottom. Next. Going south, and I'm almost finished. Going south in the city of Palhoça, there's a Casa da Cultura Açoriana de Palhoça. Okay, very interesting. Now, note one thing. Look at the colors. The white with the blue trim. That is so Portuguese and so Azorian. You know, if I know nowadays people like to use other colors, these are the colors, the typical colors of the Azores and even a lot of places in Portugal. These are what I call the Portuguese colors. There's a plaque on the bottom right. Go back, please. A plaque at the bottom right that says Memorial dos Naufragados. It's a memorial to the shipwrecked people. 173 Azorians who died in a shipwreck that happened in the month of May 1753, and they were buried here. Okay, so they're remembering these people from 1753. Next. Now we're going to go to Garupaba. We're getting towards the close here. Garupaba is fishing, but it used to be a whaling city. It reminds me a bit, by similar characteristics, it reminds me a little bit of Pico. Okay, next. And here is the anthem of the city of Garupaba. I'm going to translate it very quickly to you because I think it's interesting. It says more or less this, paraphrasing, on the bottom right. You were born in a distant past through the hands of our Guarani Indian, and much later arrived the immigrant and triumphantly he established himself here. From the overseas left the Azorian people sailing the seas with storms and furor. And in this fertile land and coastal land, they built Garupaba with their labor. Okay, and when they say, they're referring to the men and women that built this city, developed it, and it's in the spirit of the city. You can feel it. Next, here's the big ships, boats actually, not ships. Tinta São Jorge. I don't know, but São Jorge rings a bell, doesn't it, for those of us Açorians? And on the center of town, a middle collage in here. You can see at the bottom, you have the Portuguese cross, you have the Holy Spirit, and then there's a marker that talks about what happened until the Azorians arrived in 1750. They became a parish in 1830, a town in 1846, a villa, a small town in 1890, and finally a city in 1961. Next. In one of the shopping centers at Garupaba, there was an exhibit of Azorian photography, and of course you can see on the right the Azorian symbols, the Azorian flag and the Holy Spirit flag. This is the vice mayor of next. Okay, vice mayor of Garupaba, and look at the symbols. Okay, he's talking about this photography exhibit. Okay, now what happened here? Yes. Okay, now we're going to go to Rio Grande do Sul, the southernmost state. We're going to finish with that very quickly. So Porto Alegre is the capital, and it was founded by Azorians. No, it was founded. There was no city of Porto Alegre until the Azorians got there. This is the monument to the Azorian settlers. Right on the right, you have the administrative, buildings of the city of Porto Alegre, and on the left you have this monument. It's very beautiful. It's a ship, but if you notice, it's built with people. In the bottom, you have people that are part of the ship. So the whole idea of arriving here with tenacity, with energy, moving forward. These are the monument to the Azores. There is a plaque in here, Monumentos Açorianos. You can see that. The Azorians here are not forgotten. They are highly, let me be redundant, highly highlighted. You can see different angles of it. It's been in... actually, the rust makes it more beautiful. Actually, I think it adds to it. Next, in the middle of town. Next, one more. The middle of town, there's a park and there's a windmill. There's a reference to the Azorian windmill. You could find this in several islands in the Azores. Next, again, you see references to the Azores. Look at this tower, this building, Torre dos Açores, a store, a clothing store called Graciosa. Okay, next. Gramado. Gramado is a city in the mountains. It actually snows there sometimes. It's very cold. It's a very touristy place. People go there in the winter, particularly for Christmas. And it is famous for the Gramado International Film Festival. And in the center of town, there are three houses: the Italian, the Portuguese, that's what you see, and the German house. And in there, it's a Portuguese house, but it's basically an Azorian cultural center. Next. And you can see there's a Centro Luz Açoriano da Região das Hortênsias. So it's the region of this area here is called the hydrangeas region. Don't be fooled. There was not the Azores. The Azores that brought the hydrangeas was later on Emperor Pedro II that actually brought them to this region. But coincidental, they're basic in the Azores. You can see the different icons in here. There's a picture here with the coat of arms of Angra do Heroísmo in Terceira. Next. And this guy walked in dressed like a gaucho. We call it gaucho in Portuguese, in Spanish, in Argentina, it's gaucho. And he walks in there and says, in Portuguese, "Hi, I'm Freitas from Terceira." His ancestors arrived there in the 18th century, and he still considers himself the gaucho Freitas from Terceira. Okay, this guy, Tristão José Francisco de Oliveira, was the great grandson of João Dias Pereira from São Jorge. He owned all the land that makes it now the famous city of Gramado. People go there from all over Brazil. It's a tourist area. It's a very rich area. And this guy at one time owned the whole thing. Okay, next. Portuguese guy from the Azores. They have in there several publications. I'll go into some detail very quickly, having to do with the Azores. They have one called Décima Ilha. We call Décima the 10th island. All of us Azorians are outside of the 9 islands, in California, in Brazil, in Canada, etc. Look at the publications. You can see that monument. And And then on the right, there's a book called Açoriano de Alegret. Alegret is a city very close to Uruguay, which was founded by Azorians. There's still a lot of Azorian influence. Take a look at these booklets, these publications. On the left, you have a city hall of Porto Alegre, and right next to it, the city hall of Ribeira Grande de Azores. On the right, you have the scene on the top cover of this book that could very well be in the Azores. You could be in Terceira right there almost. Okay, and the Casa dos Açores, the Rio Grande do Sul is a little bit away, more inland, in a town called Gravataí. And there's a plaque in there by depicting the visit of the president of the Azorian government, Carlos César, in 2003. Now we're going to finish with this. You almost can go. Santa Marta do Sul is a town. Next one. Next. It's a town really in the interior of Rio Grande do Sul, and it was founded. It's still very Azorian. It's a small town, and there's a church with the blue and the white, and they put in there a ship with a Portuguese cross in the interior of Rio Grande do Sul to symbolize their roots. They came from the sea, they came from the Azores, and they settled in here. Next. You can see some of the buildings that could very well be in the Azores. I noticed that in the town of Terceira, there are I found many windows that have that roundish aspect at the top. They probably existed in all the islands, but probably with time that disappeared. But this is a very Azorian architecture. Next. A little museum there where you can see the Azorian references. And I'm going to finish with this. This is my last slide. I really thank you for your attention. I apologize if I was too wordy, but there's so much to be said. I like this ending because it says Rua Tomás Pereira. Tomás Pereira is a very Portuguese name, could very well be a Azorian name. And then to the right, the Rua de Liberdade, Freedom Street, which in many ways encompasses the idea of, leaving and finding your future in a new land, be it in California, be it in Brazil, be it whatever. But the Azorians have left their lands from very early from that settlement, and they really had an impact on many parts of the world. And we should celebrate it. We should also connect. If you have an opportunity to go to Brazil, to southern Brazil and other parts, go. You are going to enjoy it. Thank you very much for your attention. This is the final collage. Thank you.
Thank you, my dear friend. Excellent. Excelente, como sempre. Fascinating presentation. You hit it in a record amount of time, which is unbelievable, covering all of that from Brazil. I hope all of the students, actually, I have one student here in this class, Pearl, who is took not from you, she's just graduated, I believe, last year from San Jose High School, but she took Portuguese. Pearl Vindiola is a graduate from.
Oh yes, I know she is. Yes,
Oh,
she's famous. Oh yeah, she's yes, was a business. She was very involved in the Portuguese club.
Yes,
The leader of the Portuguese club there. She was one with a friend that brought back together that Portuguese dinner over there. And she's a wonderful person. Yes, yeah.
Yes, she is. Yes. She's a great student to have in our classroom, and I know she's proud of taking Portuguese at San Jose. So I hope all the students enjoyed it. I hope everyone on social media. I hope everyone enjoyed it. We had over 500 people follow us, so I'm sure that it was because they're enjoying it, or else they wouldn't.
Poor things.
José Luis, it is interesting though. One very quick question before we end. I know the students are up on their time, but they stuck around. That's great. Thank you. One very quick question. As an Azorian, as someone who, I mean, you came over in your teens, but you've been in constant contact with the Azores. You taught Portuguese for, all those decades. So you were part of the Portuguese American community in one way or another, up in the Bay Area, involved in some of the organizations. And what I wanted to ask you is how does one feel when you go into an area like that? And I'm always impressed when I go to the Azores and I have the fortunate situation of attending a conference. I'm always impressed how how Azorian people feel, and how they say, with all of their pomp and circumstance, but in good nature, obviously, I'm an Azorian. There's a famous one, which was the very first time I heard, Lelia Pereira Nunes say, I'm an Azorian. At that time, it was less years, but she said, I was at that conference, and a good friend of ours who now is also retired, Professor Onésimo Teotonio Almeida, retired professor emeritus from Brown, had, of course, the perfect answer when it was, and she with all of her enthusiasm, she said, "I'm an Azorian. I'm a 250-year-old Azorian." And he got up and said, "You look very well for your age." And but she was, and there's many others. We're going to have tomorrow. One of our guests is from Brazil, Regis Gomes, who is involved in one of the Casas dos Açores. But how does one feel being an Azorian living in California as you have, for half a century? How does one feel going into these areas and listening, to someone in a very obviously Brazilian accent because they've been there, for centuries? How do you how do you feel when you hear these people and how proud they are? And sometimes we have lack of that in our community at times, not as much as we used to, but years ago, you and I are both a product of a time that people weren't very proud to be Exorian at the time and here in California, and it was some of them were immigrants. What's your thoughts?
Couple of things. On one hand, a sense of responsibility. You feel like, we are part of something, and I felt almost like being an ambassador, quote unquote, as I attended, for example, that exhibit of Azorian photography. I was the only Azorian born and raised, and I felt, people were coming to me, talking to me because. Not because of me, but because of being an Azorian, born and raised in California. So the sense of responsibility says that we need to do more to connect our brothers and sisters from different parts of the world. And we have lived in many ways in isolation with from these people. We have, Zoras in California and other parts of North America, but we've not had that many contacts until recent decades. So that a sense of pride that these people, a sense of reinvigoration of my cultural roots. Saying if these people have been here for all this time and is still so strong about that, a sense of a questioning. Why can't we duplicate it here? We had a discussion with Sergio Ferreira, professor, about this. It has to do a lot with the language too. These people were Portuguese, went to Brazil. They were Zorian, but they were dealing with the same language till now. It's much easier to even if they mingle, if there's miscegenation, there's still a linguistic cultural background that's common. Here we dilute it with other and very well for very good reasons. So it's a very complicated feeling, a joyful feeling, surprise, um, and as I said, a sense of responsibility that we have to do something. Ever since then, I feel like let's create some connections. Of course, the Zoran government and directors of the communities, whoever they are, the president and the past ones, have done and continue to do a wonderful job. We've been very lucky with these directors of the Zoran communities. They know this very well. As a matter of fact, the connection that I got with Santa Catarina was through Paul Tips, and Zandrade is as well versed as anybody too, the one presently. So they make the connections. They do a tremendous job. As a matter of fact, some of this rejuvenation of Azorianism in Santa Catarina, etc., as the responsibility in part for that, it has to do with the Azorean government. With autonomy, the Azores finally had a voice abroad. Okay, and they were able to visit, create, etc., the Casas dos Açores, and then expand that. And they helped through the academic world too. They helped awaken in Santa Catarina the sense of being Azorean, because in the reality in Santa Catarina, at least, is that Azorians came there. They had to strive, they had to work very hard under very difficult conditions. And then in the 19th century, Italians and Germans came in, and they came in with much more sophisticated experience from cities, from more advanced countries. And they basically kind of took the economic command of this. And the Azorian descendants became kind of, second, I wouldn't say second class, but of second importance. It was in the 20th century, so the academic world, and then with the impulse also from the Azorian government, there was this resurgence of, I'm an Azorian. I'm very proud. We built more than, except for the native Brazilians, we built this more than anybody else. Stop caricaturing us as they were being. And we are important. Here's our culture, and these things started to appear. These things of the names of restaurants that wasn't there very much before. This is something of the last few decades. So there's a resurgence of their pride, and I think it's important to them to know that they have brothers and sisters in California, in the Azores, in Canada, and in the West Coast. This connection makes them feel that we are not just a lost 10th island up there in South America. We are part of a almost not global, but multinational experience of people that have done a lot. And that's why I like to bring names of people like Machado de Assis and others that were sons and daughters of Azorians. And these Azorians had a lot to do with that. And something like Machado de Assis, nobody in Brazil says that he's an African descendant. Yeah, his father, but what about his mother? He didn't have a mother. It was Azorian, and it was influential. So in Brazil, Portuguese and also Azorians tend to be kind of forgotten a little, diminished a little bit. You see that on television. They'll talk about the different ethnic groups, but they don't talk as much about the Portuguese influence, maybe because, Brazil is a Portuguese colony and all that. But the Azorians are special. They're genuinely different, and they have to market it. The traditions, like that I pointed out, the Holy Spirit, the Cavalhadas, which is very limited in the Azores, and other things. But the spirit of certain humility. Azorians generally, we can brag a little bit, but we have this fraternal spirit. Take a look at California. Do you know any group that has gone to us, arrived in here in the 19th century, goes to a city, a town, a small town in the valley, and builds a hall? Another place. And this is how people that get together, and the work of forgotten people. These women that peel potatoes all the time to make the food for these people. These men that were building that, but nobody knows who they were. So there's this sense of sharing, sense of giving. That has a lot to do, I believe, I could be wrong in this, with our Franciscan origins. The Azores were from very early age had a very strong Franciscan influence. And even the Holy Spirit and the presépio traditions have a lot to do with that. So we are different. We're not any better than any Portuguese. We have our faults. We have there are many things that other parts of Portugal do better and are better than we are. For example, in the maintaining the Portuguese language in the East Coast, the mainland Portuguese communities because of that proximity, tends to protect their language and teach them and be more connected. We are in the, like I like to say, we're in the fin de mundo, the end of the world over here, and we've been forgotten. Not anymore, but we were forgotten for decades and decades. So and we came over here to stay. People that before us who came over here in the 19th century, they didn't come here to come and go and go see their fest in our hometown every year. They came here to stay, And so
many of them never saw their parents or their relatives ever again. And
yes.
Well, thank you again, Professor José Luís da Silva. Thanks to all the students. Thanks to everyone who were part of this session. I ended by saying that what we're trying to do here is, of course, to sow seeds through this conversation, through these connections, seeds of memory that are deeply rooted, as we've seen, in Brazil for 260 plus years, in some cases over 300 now, of creativity that flourishes endlessly, and of unity, where the Azorian diaspora can always find itself in conversation with each other. May it always be that way, in conversation with the past, in conversation with the present, but in conversation also through the past and the present with a promise of tomorrow. And with that, we'll end this session. Thank you so much, Professor José Luís da Silva, my good friend, and thanks you all for joining us. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.